Welcome, everybody. My name is Wendy Mitchell. I'm a journalist and film festival consultant and also the editor of EFA's Close-Up magazine, which I encourage you to read online. And on behalf of the entire European Film Academy organization, I'm thrilled to welcome you today. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to have a really interesting discussion. We've titled it From Survival to Revival, Building the Post-COVID Future. And hat tip to Mike Downey for always being a great wordsmith to come up with survival to revival. So we're going to talk about restructuring, re-engineering, and realigning the European film industry. That sounds like a huge topic. I don't think we're going to get all the answers in 1 hour, and I don't think our experts should feel the pressure to come up with every solution, but we just want to check in with a really interesting group of people working across Europe and hear what they're thinking like now. So I'm really thrilled to welcome our guests. We have Agnieszka Holland, who is the veteran Polish filmmaker. Her latest film, Charlatan, premiered at the Berlinale, and she's joining us today from France. Welcome, Agnieszka.
Hello, welcome everybody.
Thanks. We have Mark Cousins, a filmmaker joining us from Edinburgh, Scotland. His latest film, do we even call it a film? It's more than a film, is a 14-hour documentary project called Women Make Film. And partly for that amazing project, he is the recipient this year of the new EFA Award for Innovative Storytelling. Welcome, Mark.
You're welcome, thank you.
We also have Thomas Vinterberg, the great filmmaker from Denmark. His latest film is Another Round. It's been in Toronto, San Sebastian, London Film Festival, winning awards, winning rave reviews. You've got to see this ending scene of the film. And it's also been a hit at Danish cinemas. One of the bona fide hits at any cinema anywhere this year is Another Round. So welcome, Thomas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
And we have Kirsten Niehuus, who is CEO of film funding at Medienboard Berlin-Brandenburg, where she has worked since 2004. I assume you're joining us from Berlin, Kirsten? Yes.
Yes, thank you for having me. And after we had a beautiful fall day yesterday, it's very gray and wintry today. So
okay. Well, that sounds like December timing for the EFAs. You'll be right in the mood. So before we start talking about predictions of the future, I just wanted to check in with everybody about how you're doing right now, what you've been up to in 2020. Agnieszka, Charlatan was launched at Berlin. Can you tell us what happened to the film after that? Have you had creative energy during lockdowns?
Well, the film, fortunately, we started in Berlin to show the film, which was the last normal big festival. And it had good response, so it was sold to several countries. But so far, most of the countries are holding on releasing it. It was released in Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. In Czech Republic and Slovakia, it was very lucky. It's certainly in Czech Republic, it had actually huge success. It did better than we expected before pandemics. And it just hit this middle ground between two waves of the pandemic. The same I had with my previous film, Mr. Jones in France, where it did very well as well. So I was quite lucky from this point of view. And other countries are, as I said, holding and waiting what will happen. Czech Academy decided to submit it as a Czech entry for the foreign Oscars, which is nice because I'm not actually a Czech citizen, so it was very generous. I supposed to shoot in this very time the new series for Apple TV in France, in Paris, but it was stopped because of the situation. So for the first time, I don't have the plans. I don't have the schedule, except of some Zoom, a lot actually of Zoom meetings, which I started to be allergic to. But I'm still very, very happy to meet all of you and to have the opportunity to talk to our members. And the reality is so new, scary and exciting in the same time that I was following several like reality shows, and one, it was about pandemics, another, it was reality show, I'm speaking about the news, and not about the creation of the filmmakers. And Polish presidential elections and situation in Poland now with the women's strike and the very important presidential elections and what will happen next in the US. So I think that for me, the reality is winning with the fiction right now. And to follow it means for me also to try to understand what it means for the future, also for the cinema, for the future of the cinema, but more widely for the future of our societies and for the future of the planet. So we are living certainly like some kind pivotal time.
Thank you, Agnieszka. Yeah, I think reality is stranger than fiction this year. I should mention to everybody watching, we know Agnieszka's camera is a little slow sometimes, but her audio will be solid. She just has a slightly dodgy French internet connection, I think, but we know this, so it's okay. Don't worry if she cuts out again. Yeah, but it'd be very interesting to see when you are able to get up and running with the Apple project. Sounds good. Mark, have people had 14 hours on lockdown to watch women make film? I hope so. This could be the best situation to watch it. No?
It did pretty well, Wendy. It's been shown during lockdown in Brazil and the UK and Spain and quite a few countries, and it's done pretty well. You know, the streaming, mostly streaming. It was planned to go into cinemas, but of course that didn't happen. You know, but I think that people in lockdown both felt that they needed to monitor the moment in the way that Agnieszka is describing, but also have a kind of long form experience as well. It felt like time stretched like mozzarella. And so the idea of an epic mode of storytelling, in this case, 14 hours, you know, was attractive. You know, and this is my edit suite where I'm sitting now, and we have completed 3 edits by Zoom. My editor 50 miles from me in lockdown. You know, we've made a film about the great film producer Jeremy Thomas, and I've made a film about how we look, etc. So it's been a fertile time, you know, and it's a time where the word time has both, you know, gone into a moment and stretched.
Well, and I know during the first few days of the first lockdown, I discovered your 40 days of film.
Oh, yes.
Which was just really helped cheer me up. Just, you know.
Yeah, I sat at this computer that I'm talking to you now and just spoke for I guess it was 2 hours or 2.5 hours, just about images. I just chose hundreds of images and just spoke to them and recorded it like this, and sent it out, because lots of film schools were hungry at the beginning of a lockdown for a certain sudden, urgent, hopefully inspiring or thoughtful sort of hit, a kind of sugar hit of cinema, you know. So I just did it and sent it out, and it seemed to go far and wide.
Wow. I mean, one thing that you would normally have if Women Make Film was showing at BFI South Bank, and it might have very quickly, but you know, if it was there or at Film House in Edinburgh or somewhere, you could go connect with an audience. And you know, even though you've been very productive, have you felt a connection with any audiences this year?
Yes, I have. I know we're going to get onto this later in the conversation, but I feel that in this moment, as well as being confined to this room and the few rooms in my apartment, also the net has been cast wider in some ways. I feel that, you know, I've connected with cinephiles in India and in Russia and in Japan and Brazil and all over North America and all over Europe. You know, that common language, that commonality that of emotion and desire and longing for cinema has been quite unifying.
That's good to hear. Yeah, not so lonely if we're connecting online, I guess. Thomas, another round, you know, one of your best films. How has it felt launching it in such a strange year? Like, I don't think you couldn't go to San Sebastian. I know you couldn't. I don't think you went to Toronto. What's it like putting out a piece of work sort of remotely in a way?
Well, it's been highly unusual. It's been very strange, actually. ironically, in my country here, we were very nervous about sending out this movie in times of confinement about 4 drunk men, celebrating alcohol. We felt it could go under the radar, but somehow, well, it could have felt slightly irrelevant, but somehow it was the opposite. If people are storming into the cinema and they come back many times. I hope it's not only because they don't understand the movie, but I think they also kind of enjoy it. And so all my personal records have been broken with this movie in this country. Now, going abroad, I haven't been doing that a lot. We couldn't go to Cannes, we couldn't go to San Sebastian, but I found a lot of bravery in these places anyway. I found it so super important that they kept going. They kept doing these festivals in a time where we have to remind people that there's still a cinema somewhere at the end of all this. So I've seen a lot of bravery amongst all these festival directors. We went to Rome, it was amazing, and I've been in Paris and promoting the film, and it's been going really well. Besides from that, my life is simple. I'm writing, and I'm taking care of my family, and for several private reasons, I can find advantages in not having to travel so much.
Do you think you'll keep that up, or keep up some of that spirit, even if we can fly around again like we did?
I think that if the pandemic would stop tomorrow, life would be normal in 1.5 years and unnoticeable anywhere. I think it takes more than a pandemic to change the world. I think it takes a world war, but what do I know? I might not be right. No. I'm not a prophet. I wish I was. I'm sometimes fooled enough to think that, but I also think that the experience of sitting in a cinema and witnessing moments, characters, situations that you'll never forget, doing that together with other people in the room, hearing the gasp in the room or the laugh in the room, is a sensation we have to remind people. Mm-hmm. We have to remind them the grandness of this common experience of sitting in a movie theater. Mm-hmm. Because it can be quite nice and quite comfortable to sit back home privately and just stream things.
Yeah. No, that's something I want to talk about a little bit more later.
I know, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, I like that you've already brought it up. So we'll come back to some of that and see everybody's thoughts on if we're all couch potatoes forever now, or why we love the cinema, more importantly. So Kirsten, coming to you, can you tell us a little bit about how Medienbord Berlin-Brandenburg has been impacted? Has your funding levels changed? Are you able to help projects who have been in trouble or needed an increased budget this year? How are you managing this?
Well, I remember that I was on holidays in Bavaria after the Berlinale, and it must have been around the 16th of March, and then the lockdown in Germany came on the 18th. And before that, I was thinking, oh, it's so nice here, maybe I'll stay a bit longer. And then all of a sudden, it was like in a science fiction movie. I just wanted to get home, and we were in the car, and we shopped in that little village store, to be sure, because from the news, it felt like there was nothing, that the Germans, I don't know about your countries, but the German bought a lot of toilet paper, noodles, flour. I don't know I don't think Germans bake that much bread, but obviously they discovered that they can. So there was practically no flour in the shops left. And again, toilet paper and pasta was totally gone.
Yeah.
And so that was the situation when I was returning to Berlin and to my office. And on the way, I had time to think, And obviously my colleagues in Germany from other funds did the same. And so we pretty fast came up with a plan to help the productions that were right in production or just before starting production, to help them cover the extra costs that came because of COVID, because they either had to stop in full shoot or just before they got started. So we set up a program where all the funds in Germany united and helped them. That was, it might sound a small thing to the rest of the world, but with these federal states and a lot of money in the different regions, it was a great step for us. I hope we don't go back to normal. Thomas, I hope your vision doesn't come true regarding the German funds. I think it'd be great if we could stay a bit unnormal, but more collective in the future. Okay, so we did that, and you know, because that was something different, we had to readjust our guidelines, blah, blah, blah. It's all completely boring outside, but I think the effect was extremely helpful, but it needed obviously some bureaucratic work in the background. Then we had the chance to help the cinemas in the first few weeks. We give awards for the cinemas in Berlin and the region around Berlin and Brandenburg for artistic and very engaged programs for the year before. So that would have been 2019. And we could triple these awards, and it's cash, and you find the check in the mail. Is probably the least bureaucratic way of helping that we could offer. And I think that helped a lot of cinemas, and it's for art house cinemas and cinemas with a program that is very carefully curated by the cinema directors, so to speak. I think that was a great help, and so it's when June came and we'd almost forgotten what a real pandemic looked like, because the weather was fine, everyone was out and about again, and people could even go to the cinema. We started to focus on our core business again, that is funding. And what we can still see is that there were not a lot of cinema films, if I can make the difference, shooting in that period of time. Usually summer, like in many other countries, is the main season for shooting films. Outside the studio, we had two big productions, Matrix 4 and Uncharted, being shot in Studio Babelsberg, but that's a different situation. There was a lot of testing going on, and it was the efforts they made were enormous. But as for shooting on location, there was not much happening here, except for, let's say, TV films, because I think television offered to pay for any financial losses due to COVID. We didn't have an insurance in place at that time. And so the city was much more quiet than before. And a lot of films have been postponed to be shot in 2021. So yeah, that's sort of in a nutshell what our life looks like.
Thank you. And have there been any projects that you know that have just not postponed but collapsed? Like they're never going to be picked up? We hope not, but
not yet. And in my long funding life, you know, they're never really dead. They usually, I've hardly ever seen a project that was dead. It just came to my attention the other day that there's a project, I think, which I had last heard of, let me think, roughly 20 years ago. And it wasn't new then, but that was the last time I heard about. And hey, here it is again. It changed hand a couple of times, but now it's coming back, and different. The main story, or the heart of the story, is the same, but it's a different producer. I think it'll be a different director. Everything is new, but the story that has been carried around for the past 20 years. And in this case, I think it's probably for the better of the project. And I'm sure that they are, you know, it's when these people on stage, when they receive the award, say, oh, I've been with this project for 20 years. Nobody wanted it, and haha, here I am, and thank you very much for the award. So that happens all the time, but no, I haven't heard about a project that has completely collapsed. I think, but that leads us also to later, if things last longer, if the pandemic lasts longer, then the question is whether all the financial contributions that have been planned for projects that have been now postponed, whether they will still be available next year. I'm talking about distributors' guarantees of world sales guarantees, because a lot of these companies have been badly affected, and it's not sure whether they still can come up with that guaranteed amount of money for.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's tragic, but to be sure, we're going to see some companies dying during this time. I did want to bring up public funding and just get everybody's thoughts on public funding in the near future. You know, I have one analyst friend who's saying, oh, public funding for the arts is going to really take a huge hit, maybe starting next year, because if you have to build new hospitals, then movies move down the list of priorities. I don't know if that's true. And I'm wondering what you experts think. Do you know, what's the role of public funding in your careers? And if it declines, are filmmakers really in trouble, or can they scramble to find private finance? Agnieszka, why don't we ask you, what do you think of public funding, the future of public funding in Europe?
No, I hope it will survive, because without public funding, the European independent cinema is just dead. And it will be even more dead because of the COVID situation. And I am not as optimistic as Thomas is, that it will pass without really big traces. And but it asks us a lot of questions, which actually we've been asked for a while, but we somehow neglected it or didn't want to see it. And now is the time to wake up and to figure out how to renovate exactly our approach to the financing of the cinema, to the distribution, and to the content, to the creativity of our films in the first place. So. And what concerns Poland, the fund is functioning. It's a very difficult situation for the part of the filmmakers who are unable to work for many reasons. But with the collapse of the distributions companies and cinemas, the situation becomes worse, because the part of the financing for the production actually is coming from those sources. So it's some kind of the ecosystem. Yeah. And when one part of the ecosystem is endangered or collapsing, all ecosystem starts to have the problems. And with FERA, also with the Federation, European Federation of Directors, and with the local academies and EFA, we are fighting for the implantation of the new laws about about the streaming platforms, about the new incomes for the filmmakers and for the cinemas funds, to replace is what is weakening, because the streaming platforms are those who are taking advantage of the situation. We all know that. But it didn't start with COVID. This trend is visible for several years already, that they are growing and taking more and more of place in the distribution and also in the production. So we have to figure out what to do about it and how we can take advantage of that, and how we have to defend what is our homeland. It means the theatrical releases of the films.
There's a lot to keep talking about from just a few lines there. I think we'll talk more about the platforms in a minute and the cinema situation. But Mark, to stick on public funding, how are you feeling? Are you positive, or, you know, I mean, was it Rishi Sunak who suggested that all artists retrain as a carpenter or something? That was some great advice. You know, how are you feeling about public support for film?
Well, I mean, public funding comes because of market failure. If the market delivered everything, we wouldn't need it. But as we know, it doesn't. And I think for me, it's a kind of public health issue or a social health issue, you could say. You know, we can see societies that don't have any public sector funding for their cinema, you know, like the US, for example. And we can see all the weakness that comes from that, you know, the lack of understanding of your own society. Ousmane Sembène, the great Senegalese filmmaker, said, a nation without cinema is like a house without mirrors. And this public funding, which isn't a lot of money, you know, helps as individuals and as societies recharge our batteries. We're all feeling a bit depleted. I think the battery level is going down and down because of COVID, and we're drawing on our inner reserves to stay positive, to stay connected. But this public funding to people like Thomas and Agnieszka and the filmmakers around the world, this can actually help us recharge our batteries again. So the case for public funding is stronger than it's ever been in my lifetime.
Good. I hope Rishi is listening out. I don't think he makes that decision, but Thomas, I was speaking to Klaus Ladegaard at Danish Film Institute the other day, and he sounded quite positive that their funding will remain in place, and, you know, who knows, maybe even get bigger in the future. Are you feeling like Denmark is looking after its creatives with public funding?
It seems you're finding some optimism coming from the north here. Well, I can say for myself, making a movie about child abuse or a celebration of alcohol, this would never have existed, obviously, without public funding. Public funding allows us to be on thin ice, allows us to be artists, and allows us to make personal movies, which I think people are yearning for. If we should talk about a pandemic, which I find more dangerous in our little isolated world, I'm not talking about public health. Obviously, people die and get sick, and I think about them and pray for them. But the real pandemic in our business started before the pandemic. The real pandemic started with these streaming platforms and the logarithms of the internet. And without public funding, there's no chance that the four of us and all the others of our comrades can make personal, artistic, challenging movies to withstand that. So that much for my optimism. I was talking more like worldwide and about health and about public behavior. But I think what happens on these streaming services and the sort of sneaking laziness of the audience, that's a proper pandemic, cultural pandemic, which we should take very serious.
Kirsten, did you want to say anything else about public funding before I move on? I think I'm going to go back to the platforms next. But anything?
Yeah, I think pretty much all of that has been said, and I think your perspective. And the only thing I might add is that, of course, we are already, as funds are strategically and politically are trying to get in position, because, of course, we are also expecting that the state budgets will be sort of rearranged in 2022 after hopefully the pandemic is over. It costs very, very much money. I think that goes for every country where Corona hit. And this money has to be sort of re-earned or cut back in the coming budgets. So we can already start lobbying for that.
Yes, raise your voices now so that in a few years this isn't.
Everyone, I guess everyone knows Churchill's famous words from Second World War, where he was asked if he was going to cut back on cultural subsidies because of the war. And his reply was simple: then what are we fighting for?
I think England was never very well known for subsidies in the arts in the times of Churchill. So maybe it was easier for him to say that.
Probably.
I like the thinking though. But yeah, I wanted to talk about the platforms and how you see them, you know, can they be used for good? And, you know, when we say platforms, you have a sort of monolith like Netflix, and then you've got something like Mubi, which is really promoting art house film for a very low cost to the audience and foreign cinema. And it, you know, platforms mean many different things, but why don't we talk about maybe the big platforms, Netflix, Amazon, that level. Yeah, as several of you have mentioned, you know, this change started many years ago and has been ramping up pre-pandemic. This was a sort of looming, I don't know if we call it a crisis or a challenge, or it was just radically changing a lot of things about the film business from these platforms and how audiences were using them. So yeah, I guess, do you see, can we all get along? Can Netflix and Amazon coexist with the traditional European art house funding model, release model, you know, traditional windows? Can we all make it work together? Or would you like, for example, to see more funding, you know, a regulatory impulse for the platforms that they have to chip in a certain amount for European filmmaking or show a certain quota of European films on their platforms, which I know has been put forward for them already. Yeah, how do you see us living with the platforms? Can we thrive together?
Me?
Yes, anyone. Yes, Agnieszka, look at you first.
So, you know, as was said, it started way before COVID, but COVID can reinforce this tendency, especially among younger generation, because we started losing younger generation a long time ago, and the generation which is used to communicate mostly in virtual way and stay in some kind of the virtual world and use the internet as the main connection to the reality and to the other people. Those are like very deep changes which are impossible to stop practically, but still the tendency, the strategy was to create something attractive enough to convince them to leave their room and their screen and come outside and to be with other people, also in consuming the culture, lower culture, higher culture, pop culture, whatever, but to go out. And this, it was stopped by COVID, for, you know, as we know, and somehow it gave the excuse to them to stay in this slightly, you know, oniric, lazy world. And the question is, if the habits are changing so deeply, that it will be very difficult to convince them again, to create something, to, you know, the desire to be together and to watch it in the more live way and in the theaters. That is one thing. Another thing is that platforms anticipated this tendency also and started to produce a lot of the content which cinemas are not giving, like the long series, and also to think about this kind of the audience. And when you are talking to the Netflix executives right now, or other big platforms executive, but mostly Netflix, which is the biggest and, you know, and richest right now, they are really interested in doing the things for the young adults. I was talking about this tendency for like years now, when being the chairwoman of the EFA boards and on another occasions, trying to say that we will be colonialized as Europeans if we will not create the platform which responds to our culture needs, which can dictate. And the platform you've been quoting, the movies and so on, you know, it's great that they exist, but that is like, you know, the place is the cinephile place to watch some movies. but it's not dictating the market. It's not like influencing the market really. To influence the market, you need to produce the content, and you need to have enough of money and power to impose yourself, to be really attractive for the wider audience. And we don't have in Europe the tool like that. We don't. We didn't create it. There was a time. Now I don't know if economically it's possible. The market is crowded now, and we didn't unite our libraries in the way which make them really, special. Mm. So it's why I'm pessimistic, but at the same time, I think that it's the last moment to really be creative about it, and creative also in the terms of the business. Mm. Netflix, I can to say that I worked with Netflix a few times, as well in US as in Poland. I worked with HBO on both continents. I did the things. I like them. It means they've been fine. They've been, generous somehow. They gave me relatively a lot of freedom for such a huge corporation. But they will be not interested in supporting us. They can take advantage of us eventually. If we can deliver for them something which they can sell well and easily, they will be using us or inviting us to be nicer. And if not, they will not. They may buy a lot of films, but it is not the curated platform. It is algorithm, and they are pushing in front the things which are the easiest to sell, and also like trying to respond to the particular viewer taste. They are not like they can support independent artistic cinema in the highest quality cases, if they can promote their platform because of that. And unfortunately here, several years ago already, the big festivals, Cannes especially, which is the most important, stopped Netflix. They just kicked them out, right? It was so stupid that, I was thinking that I'm watching Kodak executives, being so arrogant about the, technological changes. Because if in this time, they needed us, today they don't. Today they refuse even when producing movies. They, for example, produce the film now, the short segments film, the collection film made by 5 women directors in Poland, based like the kind of the dystopic erotical story, very interesting actually piece, based on the screenplays by 5 important Polish women writers. So very feministic kind of the and some festivals were interested and they refused to give it, and they say that their policy, and I talk also to another executives, is now not to give the films to the festivals, because for them is only interesting if they are winning, and of course no one can assure them that they will win. So if they are not winning, they don't care. So suddenly, and that it will be the policy of other platforms. HBO is not practically producing the movies, and most of the platforms will be not producing the movies because economically it's not interesting for them. They spend less money for the income when producing series or even miniseries. So we are now in the situation of the clients, and the question is if the theatrical distribution will survive on the level we had before COVID, which was pretty good. In most of the countries, it was pretty good, but not good enough to have a lot of reserves for those companies. Yeah. So if the COVID will be longer, and if the habits will persist, and in some countries they will probably not. France is so cinephile that they will come back to the theaters, but in the several countries it will. So we have, my only quick solution now is we have to make better movies. It means when you are watching what we are doing in Europe, like we are doing a lot of decent movies. We are doing a lot of okay movies. We are doing few great movies. Few, let's admit, like great movies by year, which really can like attract, you know, the film critics, festivals, and the audience in the same time. Our number is very limited, and we are doing a lot of mediocre films, and will not attract the people to come to the theater with the mediocre films. We have to be also, we have to come out from our comfort zone, to be more courageous, to be more connected to the, you know, to what's going on in the people's life, but deeply, not only on the surface. To be challenging, to be relevant, to be artistically more courageous, everything. So that we can do.
Okay,
with the help, especially of the funds and, you know, and the sources like, I don't know, Arte, some TV stations and some platforms. But I'm coming back to the fact that we need European big platform, which is able to produce as well the series as the movies.
Okay, Thomas, do you think we need that European platform? Do you think we're going to get it?
I just have to agree with Agnieszka's great point at the end, which I was warming up to say as well. The only way to attack this huge challenge we have in front of us is to consider it a challenge. We've been singing with a certain voice for a while, and even in the art house business at the finest festivals in the world, you can find a sense of a recipe, a repetitiousness. You call it mediocre movies. We have to sing in a different voice. We have to stir the image. We have to do things that make people want to go to the cinema because they're seeing something else. And that kind of challenge will always be healthy. It's difficult, but it's healthy. Even for those of us who find ourselves at the fine platform of doing adventurous, great, interesting, stately supplied movies, we need a kick in our butt as well. And there's definitely a good chance here. And it is possible. It is possible to get young people into the cinema. I don't know if it was a lucky punch, but it just happened in my country with my own movie. They come 2, 3, 4 times to, you know, with a bag of beer to see the same movie. So it is possible. I find it incredibly important to reverse this into a challenge and not an oppressive sense of apathic film depression. And I see there's so many great filmmakers in Europe and all over the world who would be capable of doing that, who would be capable of what Agnieszka calls leaving their comfort zones. Exactly the same we ask our actors to do all the time. Get them out there where the ice is thin. And that's going to create curiosity, and that's going to make people want to go back to the cinema. I know I'm a Nordic optimist again now, but I believe in that.
I like some optimism, so that's very welcome. Mark, I was going to pigeonhole you because you're getting this new award for innovation in storytelling. You know, just your reflections on whether you look around and see enough people taking risks, like Thomas said, skating on that thin ice, taking chances on the way they tell stories. Do you see enough of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's crucial to it, you know, and yeah, if you look around the world, you know, there are people, you know, reinventing cinema a lot. I remember when that documentary Leviathan came out first. Remember the Boston people? I can't remember their names now, but that was, you know, GoPro cameras, you know, tied onto fish, you know, wow. You know, and look at what Apichatpong does in Thailand, and look at him, you know, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was one of the most innovative films that I've seen, and Lucille Hadzilahilovic in France, and Radu Yuda in Romania, and of course Roy Anderson's still doing these unbelievable things in Sweden. Around the world, there are loads. The question is, you know, how many do we need? You know, let's say we need 100 innovators every year around the world, because let's be honest, part of this conversation that we're having about streaming and and the formulaic or conventional way of doing things. We could have had, and they did have in the 1930s and 40s, Hollywood was extremely conventional. Louis B. Mayer, all these people, it's always been the struggle between the formulaic and the conventional, and the original and the innovative, and the ice skaters, as Thomas puts it, and the the out of the comfort zone people. And there's always a lot. And the way that, for me, a question then is, how do we make sure that they don't get lost? How do we teach the values of that? And so it's film schools. It's, for me, crucially, teaching film in school, the excitement of cinema to 10-year-olds, so that they get the lust for cinema, the desire for cinema, which they can become the new David Lynch, they can become the new Thomas, and whoever, Agnieszka, the people who are thinking afresh, who are not under imagining the medium. And so I don't blame Netflix and Amazon. Thankfully, I'm grateful to Amazon Prime, because I can see Indian films of the 50s that I would not see anywhere else. There are films from, sorry, I'll shut up in a moment, but I get quite passionate about this. There are films by Guru Dutt, whose name is, he made this film, Kagaz Ke Phool. I waited a decade to see his films, and then there they were on Amazon Prime. So I'm not going to blame the streamers, and I'm not going to be as too negative about that. And what's more, sorry, my final point is that we can love cinema in all sorts of ways. In the religion of Islam, you have your prayer mat where you worship at home, but then you have your Friday mosque where you go and worship with 1,000 other people. And we as movie lovers can have our prayer mat, which is our home way of seeing cinema, and our Friday mosque.
Let's talk about that mosque. Cinemas have some had been struggling already. I think every cinema on the planet has had, either some kind of lockdown or restriction, or are still closed, or have gone into bankruptcy, as we've seen with some. I think all of us would agree that cinema is important as one option to view stories. So how do we help save cinemas? Kirsten, you were talking about extra funding. Is that viable long term? What else can we do other than make really great cinematic work that people take their bag of beer and go 3 times? What can we do to save cinema culture? Big question, Kirsten.
Well, I think as we've seen in many developments in the past, I don't know, past years, in many ways, things change, and the situation of cinema will not stay the same. I would totally agree. I like that image of the prayer mat that Mark just introduced. And I think it's about the mix. And I think you cannot, people should have the freedom to decide whether they want to go to the cinema or whether they want to watch something at home. Nobody, I don't want to be forced or to do one or the other. I think maybe regarding the cinemas, we have to, at least for the art house films and art house cinemas, maybe we have to take into consideration to fund them like we do with opera houses or with theaters, and then we will have a fully subsidized product from beginning to end, meaning production, distribution into these cinemas, and to provide these cinemas with the money they need to be ready for the audience. Why not? I mean, we do it with music, we do it with theater. Why not with cinema if we consider cinema as an art? Of course, that would be a much smaller number of cinemas than we have now. But I believe that there's a point in it and that we should definitely aim for that. And on the other hand, let me just say that the arrival of platforms and platform productions gave chances to many people in the film industry, directors, young actors that would have never had the chance to handle a big budget before, because it was always the same people that were, or more or less the same people that were telling a lot of stories that were repetitious. And I think the appearance of the market of Netflix, Amazon, and the others opened a Pandora's box in many ways, but also in some good ways. And when we talk about platforms, please keep in mind that at least in Germany, but I think that goes for other countries in Europe as well, are turning their stations into platforms. They call them Mediathek, but that's nothing else than a platform. And they are financing movies. That's, I think, very important. Yeah, so that's it for now.
I just want to say that we should not be object to a great misunderstanding that the platforms itself are a problem. Those are just grocery stores with windows where you can shop different things. The problem is a little bit deeper. The problem is the creative laziness at the audiences and by those who make the movies. We have to educate people to want to see interesting and great movies, challenging movies, also on the platforms. And ironically, I agree that those platforms have actually given space to a lot of very, very interesting hours of material. And they've been challenging, and they've been supportive of young filmmakers. I agree on all of that. So it's the current under the platforms that we have to talk about, and what has been revealed by these platforms. Conservatism, mediocrity, artistic laziness, whatever you want to call it, that's what we have to challenge.
But don't we have to challenge that also in unchallenged art house cinema, which we had for so many years, and which I think, and maybe as a funder, that's an unpopular thing to say, became a bit boring after a while and didn't feel...
I agree.
So
sitting in those festivals around the world in different juries, you realize that there's a recipe, there's a laziness, and there's a comfortable way of leaning back into a certain art house way of looking at life. And I totally agree that has to be shaken and stirred. Absolutely.
Where does TV fit into all this for you? Because I know, Thomas, you're starting to work on your first TV series, which sounds really cool. Agnieszka's worked in TV. Mark, your films have been shown on TV. I don't know if they were commissioned by TV. Do you see TV as a threat to cinema culture? Or is TV just another great place to tell stories and we shouldn't have to worry about it so much?
Is that a question for me?
Yes, why don't we start with you? Because you're moving into TV.
Well, I watched, I thought it was a great cinematic experience watching Babylon Berlin, which happened to be on television. And I thought it was so, it's not that simple. It's a complicated question. How do we save the cinemas? Well, some of the most visionary cinema people have appeared on television, which will now soon be platforms. So it's all a bit confusing, I think. It's a way of thinking. I think the most problematic thing is the algorithms, which sells and supports the laziness of a population. But I find it I have to say, I find it very difficult to pinpoint what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I look at something like Michaela Cole's I May Destroy You, not commissioned by an algorithm, as some of the most interesting storytelling, brave work that I saw, more so than most films that I watch. So I don't think we can sort of, pinpoint this is bad, this is good. Agnieszka.
Well, where this success of the innovative television, innovative TV series came. It came from the mediocrity of the movies. And also it came from the fact, it happened in the 90s, when suddenly the cinema became very, as we said already, lazy somehow. And And also the star system made it very heavy and expensive and afraid of changes and afraid of the risk. And independent cinema deserted audience. It means the politics of the festival and film critics in the 80s and 90s was very much to push away something which was called cinema of the middle. It means the cinema which has attractive enough storytelling for the wider audience to attract it, even if it speaks about complicated, complex issues, and even if it has quite personal handwriting. So suddenly it was a vacuum, and the television came and fulfilled this vacuum with really innovative storytelling and innovative stories. And this romantic period in the creative TV series, it was late 90s. It was first probably 10 years of 21st century. And you had the series like The Wire, for example. You had the series like The Sopranos. You had many series, mostly American, eventually Anglo-Saxon, but mostly Americans. And again, Europe was behind. It means we've been snobbing it. We've been eventually attracted to American series because American. But the filmmakers and writers of the American levels was started to work on the series, and European writers and directors have been very, very spread, and the television, the networks have been very conservative and very, and very afraid of any kind of the risks. It started in Israel. It started in Scandinavia. It was here and there some very, interesting production on the television, and like, I don't know, like was the Decalogue of Kieślowski in some time, like was Heimat in some moment, like it was a Kingdom by Lars von Trier. But it was, it was isolated cases, and mostly the television have been really like little bourgeois dead. So. And so American took all the place, and they built their success because, Netflix years ago, not so long time ago, it was the institution which was sending the DVDs to rent, right? HBO also, it was something like that. And they, they reacted to the changes. They took a lot of risks, also artistic risks and certainly commercial risks, and they succeed. And they made some kind of the monopoly. And then only now we start to do interesting series like Berlin Babylon, you quoted, with the 20 years of retard, or 15 years maybe. So we have a lot to catch up.
Yeah.
And our cinema is paying for that as well, because the cinema, to travel, to make this kind of the fuss, maybe it's the old concept, but it's still true. It depends on the actors, on the popularity of the actors, on the star potential of the actors. And when you watch Europe today, and when we've been, trying to find European stars for some awards in European Film Academy, you see that our film European stars are mostly in 60s, 70s, 80s or dead. And if somebody has a really well-known name among European actors, it's when it's acting in American TV series.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Mark, did you want to jump in there? I'm sorry to cut you off.
First of all, I was 60s, 70s, 80s are dead. I thought that was a great line. And, for me, Wendy, I think it's a thing, I agree with a lot of this, but it's not only about producing or the different ways of funding. I think I'm a different person when I go to the pictures, when I go to the cinema. When I go to the cinema, it's closer to me like going dancing or swimming or climbing a hill or something. It's a surrender to the experience entirely. I say to a filmmaker, here are 2 hours of my time, do something with it. I give it entirely to you. At home, I don't do that. I sit in my room next door and I'm the boss, I'm in charge, so I can stop it and rewind it and watch it tomorrow. And why I'm more optimistic than some of the tone of our conversation is that I think human beings, it's deep in us to want to submit, to lose control, to be out of ourselves, not to be in charge, not to be in our domestic environment all the time. And that's why I think, you know, that the idea of cinema, which addressed that so precociously 120 years ago or 130 years ago, will survive, because we as human beings, and especially under COVID and lockdown, we know that whilst there are the pleasures of the domestic world and the comforts, and we need to lose ourselves. And cinema does that like no other, no, maybe like swimming, but apart from that, it's more immersive than anything else.
Yeah, in a dumbed down way. I mean, I've got to get out of this house at some point soon, and I've got to stop looking at my phone. Yeah. And yeah, the swimming pool is the only other place where I do that. Yeah. So the cinema and the swimming pool. Tom.
Well, the life of the uncontrollable,
yeah,
is something people don't understand anymore. They forgot that falling in love is something beyond our control. We're falling.
But Thomas, why
they forgot that getting an idea is something we get from somewhere. It's not something we can buy on the internet. So I support your fight for the uncontrollable.
But Thomas, why do you say that, you know, people don't get it anymore? What has happened that, you know, that people don't get it? I think they definitely get it. People, you know, if you come to the end of a day and you've done something or experienced something that made you, give you a kind of defibrillation, a recharge, you know, to
let me tell you what.
Of course you want that, don't you?
Let me challenge that a little bit. When Wendy Mitchell is going to write her next article, there's going to be a click counter for how many clicks she gets. And besides from that, she's going to be told how long they stayed with each click. Then when she gets out of her chair from the article she wrote, her iPhone is going to count how many steps she's taking. Then she's going to talk to her daughter, who's going to have to lay out a complete map of her education for the next many years. There's so much measuring, so much control, that I'm just saying the space for the uncontrollable is limited. And but to some extent, I agree with you. The human being needs it. And the cinema is a place where you can let go of control. I love that. I think it's beautiful.
And we, you know, our neurobiology is ancient. It comes from paleo, you know, it comes from like millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years ago. And so, yes, of course, it's annoying to be monitored and told how many steps you can do every day. But the primal, the desirous, the utopian, the intoxicated, the mythic, the magical aspects of our natures will not be they will not be flattened or by the current technology.
I buy that. I vote for
but on the other hand, doesn't that also mean that we can trust the audience rather than to think, oh, how do we get the audience back to the cinema?
Yes, I agree with that as well.
I totally agree that the product that is displayed in the cinema, i.e. the films, needs to be attractive. I think there's, for a long time, we were in a situation where cinema and, let's say, filmmakers felt that they had a birthright to be there, and it was always the same prayer that's been repeated. Oh, and then we all sit there in common and we laugh together and we cry together, la 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 la. And but that didn't suffice anymore at some point, because we couldn't really laugh and couldn't really cry, because there were we knew that there was better storytelling somewhere else, for instance, on the platforms. So if you want to, you know, I think people still have the urge to go to the cinema, and I don't doubt that cinema will survive, but maybe not every cinema and not every film. And I think it's about the mix, and we certainly can't turn back the clock, but I think we can, like Agnieszka said, we can really try hard to provide the audience with a more interesting storytelling. And again, I think for a long time before there were series, well, modern series on German platforms and television, also the commissioning editors weren't very good at finding new talents and allowing more freedom. And when you look at what happens now, you have a completely different kind of storytelling than what we see in the so-called art house blueprint film. It's much more fresh. It's less regulated. It's not only elliptic. I think we got that. I mean, elliptic storytelling we all manage now. But it's about diversity. It's about different characters. There was a series in Berlin called 4 Blocks. I don't know whether you've heard about it. It's about a Lebanese clan in Neukölln. Neukölln, you might all know because it's sort of the hipster area in Berlin with all the bars and the clubs and but it's also the place where the Lebanese clans are having their mafia 4 blocks. And it's almost like a documentary. It's very real. It's never been on television like this before. And it made people with definitely non-bio-German background. So they were not tall and blonde, but they were definitely olive-colored skinned, and they became stars with that series. And this series is now practically on every platform. And on public television, but it came from a very small platform called TNT, and it made its way. This would have never happened 10 years ago, no way. And so I'm pretty ambivalent when it comes to platform bashing.
What's the title again?
4 Blocks.
Okay. I'm afraid we're going to have to start wrapping up on time, but I'm going to try to force a happy ending here. Thomas has already been a ray of Nordic sunshine for us, but what gives you hope for the next few years? It could be something that you think is a sort of silver lining in the pandemic. We got Trump out of office. But if you look at the film world for the next few years, what's something that's either exciting you, giving you a little bit of hope? I'll start. For me, it's, that the world is really, one good side effect of Netflix is the world is open to non-English language content more than it was previously. Not that it wasn't there before. So yeah, I'm excited to see more stories from parts of the globe I haven't seen. I want to see more voices from marginalized communities stories I haven't seen before. And that's not saying I don't want to see you white guys making films, because I do. But like we said, you'll make the best and the best. We'll get lots of voices, no more mediocre stuff in the middle.
I think that the art house scene will survive this Darwinistic turn of times in movie making, where we have to adapt and have to change, and hopefully we'll land on the other side with strength, with curiosity, with a sense of aggression towards great stories and great storytelling. I hope and believe so. That was my last ray of optimism from me.
Okay. Agnieszka?
Well, I'm very much about diversity, and I believe that the women's voices, which been really practically muted, because if we have like 6, 7, 8% of the films made by women, and we are half or even a bit more of the humanity, it is not right, and it makes somehow the very important subjects being blocked or distorted. And I see more and I see more and more of conscience about it. And I'm not even speaking about the Scandinavian regulation, which are giving really the space to women in the legal way. It means to making the quotas and establishing some equality here. But I'm thinking about the openness of the women's audience to communicate with themselves, to communicate with their really deeper in. And same about, about LGBT communities, about different minorities, and also about, for example, Asian cinema, which symbolically Asian film, and I think very important film to me at least, won suddenly a big Oscar. It never happened before. So this appetite for the diversity is not only politically correct, thing coming from the top, but it is a real curiosity which can be encouraged by the quality of the storytelling. So that is my optimism. Women and the others.
Great. Yeah, I'm
But
glad you mentioned that parasite.
Of course, I don't want to tell that white men are not the place on the on the map. They do.
Yes, they do. The good ones. Yeah. Kirsten, what gives you a bit of hope?
I totally believe in creativity. And I don't think that the algorithms will rule the world. I think they will rule part of the world, but not all the world. So, and I believe in diversity in many ways also, I mean, first in society, but also in the way on how we can consume content, film, series. I think right now, and I believe we're about to turn over a lot of regulations that have been set in stone in the past, and this stone is crumbling, and I think that's a great chance.
Okay, Mark.
Yeah, and I think today, this week, as we're talking, there'll be people who are born with a kind of natural, visual, expressive talent. And if they were born 50 years ago, they would probably have been excluded from the film industry because of the wrong class or gender or continent. And now they're less likely to be excluded. And these people, whoever they are, these future citizens of cinema, they can tell us about the mountaintop and the valley of tears and everything in between. And the cinema is the mountaintop and the valley of tears and everything in between.
Wonderful. I'm not going to try to be more poetic than that. I want to really thank all of our speakers who joined us today. That was really fascinating. We could have gone on for hours, but nobody can listen for hours on Zoom. So thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. I think one thing we've been hearing here is, watch the good stuff. Don't watch the mediocre stuff. Take risks, support your cinemas. Yeah, we've got lots of actions we can take. Lobby for public funding. Stay strong, everyone. Please stay healthy. Please stay creative. And I'd really like to thank the audience that's joined us online today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the EFAs week. So we'll say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys and girls.